And I want to move on to a conceptual thing that is kind of important. It's not going to throw you an error if you don't use these, but it is going to help you be a better programmer if you use getter and setter methods, because it is considered a pretty basic programming best practice. And so what are getter and setter methods? Well, getter and setter methods are a way of making your objects a little bit more robust and making your life a little bit easier. But without a getter and setter method, if I wanted to make an instance of this class called CL car, I call it my car, and I wanted to change the number of wheels to 2, I can do that directly just like this. I can say my car.intWheels equals 2, and it'll change the instance number of wheels to 2 wheels. And that's fine as long as I'm really confident that the data is going to reflect what I want it to. In other words, it's going to be an integer. If I put 2.5 here, it's going to change this to 2.5. And if I have something that expects an integer, or if it's a string and I expect an integer, I'm going to run into problems. And so what we have are getter and setter methods, and these ensure that the object has control over the information. It contains error handling, so the both look before you leap and easier to ask for forgiveness, error handling inside the object, and it simplifies debugging. So a getter and setter method might look like this. So rather than doing this, where I could say my car dot int wheels equals 5, okay, and if I do that, you can see it works. It changes that, but it's dangerous to do it that way. So rather than change things directly in your object instance, the best practice from a programming perspective is to do something like this. Set wheels, self, okay, so I'm going to create a method that takes an argument that contains the number of new wheels, and I'm going to use that to set the number of wheels. Now, the simplest way to do this is to say self.intWheels equals new wheels. And so instead of doing this, I'm going to say set wheels, if I can spell wheels, and I'm going to give it the number 5 as an argument. Now, why is this better than what I did before? Because, well, right now it's not, because I haven't done anything special. But now this object controls whether this happens or not. So the first thing I would want to do is check to make sure that it's an integer, right? So if I use isNumeric, or if I use floor division, I mean, there's a number of different ways I can check this, but I'm going to just say let's just say try. I'm going to use try and catch here, or try and accept. And maybe I'll give it a little message here too. F string Okay, so if it works, we're going to do this. If it doesn't, then it's going to give me the error message. So now, obviously it works if I have 5 there, but if I want to force it to be an int, so if I go 5.2, it'll force it to be an int. If I say the word 5, it'll say that's not a valid number of wheels. So I have a lot more control now because that is what I've set the control of changing the number of changing whatever property is in this object. Now this object controls whether that property gets changed or not. It controls how, it controls what kind of data. It is sort of a self-contained filter. And if there's an error, by the way, in changing this, then that error happens in that object where it's easy for me to find and debug and figure out what's going on. So there's a ton of really good, especially for a setter. But it's very common also to have what's called a getter. And there are maybe fewer reasons for this, but it's also good practice to get wheels, and there may be a reason to do this that allows you to have that same level of control. But at a minimum, what you might do is return self int wheels. So if I'm going to do that, okay, so now I'm getting the wheels using the get wheels method, and there might be a reason why I would want to filter what gets returned. I could say if self dot int wheels is greater than 4, you could say something like return return 0 and print there was a problem, too many wheels detected, or something like that. Who knows? If there's too many wheels, it'll just return 0. So then I'm controlling whether that information gets out. Again, I'm putting the control of whether that information gets out of that object or what comes out of that object, rather than allowing that direct access to the properties inside that object. That's just good programming practice, to have getters and setters rather than accessing the properties of the object directly. There are times when it's fine, it's not a big deal to access them. More often when you're getting that information than when you're setting that information. So you always want to think about who's allowed, or what entities in your program are allowed to change the properties inside of an object. And then you want to limit that whenever possible.